The colony sat quietly on a distant, remote planet, a speck of human life in the vast emptiness of space. The planet, bathed in the soft glow of a distant star, seemed like a haven, a place untouched by the chaos of the universe. The settlers, families, engineers, and soldiers had built a thriving community from the ground up. The air was fresh with the scent of earth and new crops, and the gentle hum of activity filled the air as life unfolded at its own peaceful pace. It was a far cry from the stories of war and destruction that had plagued humanity in the past, a stark contrast to the harsh, unforgiving universe beyond the colony's perimeter. Sarah Locke, the colony's captain, stood at the heart of it all. Her strong, commanding presence was felt in every corner of the settlement, but there was a quiet tenderness to her as well. She had earned her leadership through grit and perseverance, always at the forefront when decisions needed to be made. Despite the weight of her responsibilities, she maintained an emotional connection to the people she led, their hopes, their fears, and their dreams. It wasn't just her position that made her the heart of the colony. It was her unwavering belief in their shared future. Her connection with her pet, Whiskers, a small, scrappy tabby cat, was perhaps the most human part of her. The cat had been with her through thick and thin, a constant companion during the long, lonely nights in the early days of the colony's founding. Whiskers, now more than ever, was a symbol of the warmth and humanity that kept Sarah grounded, even in the most trying times. As she walked through the colony, she absently stroked the cat's soft fur, its presence a reminder of the delicate balance she sought to maintain between duty and personal connection. The colony was thriving, but Sarah could feel the tension, the awareness of something looming just out of sight. The peaceful hum of everyday life suddenly interrupted her thoughts. A small beep from her communicator signaled an incoming message. Sarah's fingers lingered over the device for a moment before she activated it. The encrypted message that appeared on the screen sent a sharp chill through her veins. It was brief, cryptic, and unsettling. Pirates. Warning. Sector 12. Approaching. She read the words twice, each time feeling the weight of them sink deeper into her chest. Pirates. The thought seemed absurd. The outer sectors had been known to harbor rogue elements, but never had any of them ventured so close. She could feel her heart rate quicken, but there was no time for panic. She immediately called up her Lieutenant Hawkins, who appeared on the screen, his face taut with concern. "Captain, you saw the message?" Hawkins's voice crackled with urgency. "I saw it," Sarah replied, trying to keep her tone steady. Her mind was already running through the possibilities. Pirates. Why now? How close? The questions filled her head, but the answer was always the same. It didn't matter. The threat was real. "They're closer than we thought," Hawkins continued. "Could be a diversion, but we can't take any chances. We should put the colony on high alert." Sarah looked out over the colony, the sprawling community bathed in the golden light of the afternoon sun. Everything seemed so normal, so peaceful, but the unease gnawed at her. It was impossible to ignore the danger, especially when she had no idea just how close the pirates were or how prepared they might be. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. "We'll be ready," Sarah said, her voice calm but resolute. "Activate all defenses. Have everyone stand by for further instructions. No one gets through here." She disconnected the call and turned to a nearby officer, giving quick, precise instructions to begin the perimeter checks. Her mind raced, thoughts a blur of strategy and contingencies. It wasn't the first time she had faced an unknown threat, but something about this felt different. The pirates weren't just passing through, they were coming for something. What that something was, she couldn't say, but Sarah knew one thing for sure: the colony was in danger. She stepped outside into the colony's central square, where children were playing and families went about their daily routines. The laughter of the children echoed in the air, a sound so pure it almost seemed out of place given the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Sarah looked down at Whiskers, the cat twining around her feet, seeking comfort from the woman who had always been there for it. Sarah knelt, brushing a hand through the cat's fur, her fingers lingering on the soft warmth. "I don't know what's coming, Whiskers," she whispered, her voice tight. "But we'll get through it, we always do." The cat looked up at her, its wide eyes unblinking, seemingly aware of the change in the air. It mewed softly, almost as if in response. But Sarah could no longer ignore the growing sense of dread that was beginning to settle over her. Back at the command center, the mood shifted swiftly from calm to tense. Officers moved with purpose, checking systems, preparing for the worst. Sarah knew the pirates were closing in, but she didn't know how long they had before they arrived, or what they were truly capable of. The reality of the situation was beginning to set in. The peaceful life the settlers had built was fragile, and in a matter of hours, it could all come crashing down. But Sarah wasn't one to cower under pressure. She would do whatever it took to protect her people, even if that meant facing a threat far worse than anything they had ever imagined. As night began to fall, the first signs of trouble appeared. Distant, flashes in the sky, a low hum in the air. Sarah stood on the colony's highest platform, looking out at the darkening sky. It was then that she saw them, silhouettes against the stars. The pirates had arrived, and they were closer than she had ever feared. The peace was over. The calm before the storm had shattered. And now Sarah Locke's fight to protect her people was about to begin. The stillness of the evening was shattered by the distant sound of something unnatural, a deep, low hum that vibrated through the air. At first, it was barely perceptible, a tremor in the silence, but as the minutes passed, the hum grew louder, a deep, mechanical roar that gnawed at the edges of the colony's tranquility. Sarah Locke was in her quarters when the first blast shook the ground beneath her feet, sending a ripple of shock through the entire settlement. The colony's automated defense systems immediately triggered, but they were no match for the ferocity of the attack. There was no warning, no time to brace for what was coming. Explosions erupted across the perimeter, bright flashes of light cutting through the night. The pirates, fast and relentless, descended like a storm of fury. Their ships, sleek and deadly, tore through the sky in a flawless, terrifying formation. The colony's shields flickered under the pressure, barely holding, while Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had prepared for trouble, but nothing could have prepared her for this. Nothing could have prepared her for how quickly everything had changed. A voice crackled through her comm, urgent and panicked. It was Lieutenant Hawkins, his voice laced with the unmistakable edge of fear. "Captain, they're here. The perimeter's breached. They're not here just to raid. They've come to wipe us out." Sarah's mind raced as she scanned the chaos unfolding outside. The pirates' ships swooped low, their weapons tearing through buildings, sending clouds of dust and debris into the air. People screamed in the streets as they ran for cover, their faces twisted with terror. The smooth, coordinated attack was unlike anything Sarah had seen before. This wasn't just a plunder, it was an execution. A calculated, ruthless assault designed to eliminate every trace of human presence from this corner of the galaxy. "Evacuate the civilians! Get them to the bunkers!" Sarah shouted into her comm, her voice cutting through the noise of destruction. There was no time to hesitate. She needed to keep the people alive. Whiskers, sensing the danger, darted around her feet, his small body trembling. Sarah knelt briefly, scooping up the cat in her arms as her mind raced with commands. She had always known that her role was to protect the colony, but the reality of it, this moment, this attack, was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Outside, the streets were in utter chaos. Families stumbled through the debris, frantically, trying to reach the safety of the underground bunkers. Soldiers and engineers were attempting to mount some sort of defense, but the pirates' firepower was overwhelming. The colony's meager weapons were no match for the advanced, brutal technology the pirates wielded. Sarah could hear the deafening sound of plasma fire tearing through the air as she sprinted toward the command center, every step a fight against the rising panic in her chest. When she arrived, the command center was already a whirlwind of activity. Officers were shouting orders, tracking pirate ships as they passed overhead. Hawkins was there, trying to organize the defense, but it was clear to Sarah that they were losing ground fast. "They're overwhelming us, Captain. The shields won't hold much longer. We've got maybe 10 minutes before—" The words were cut off by another deafening explosion, the shockwave rattling the command center. A piece of the ceiling collapsed, dust swirling in the air. Hawkins ducked instinctively, but Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her expression hardening. "Reinforce the south wall. Pull all non-essential personnel to the lower levels. I'm not abandoning this colony." Hawkins looked at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "We can't hold them off." "The civilians—" "I said get them underground," Sarah interrupted sharply, her tone brokering no argument. "I'll deal with the pirates. We protect them, or this ends tonight. Do it." Her voice was a commanding presence, but beneath, it was a storm of fear, a storm she couldn't let anyone else see. She turned on her heel and moved out of the command center, her mind whirling with plans, with solutions, with a desperate hope that she could turn the tide. Whiskers squirmed. In her arms, the cat's small body radiating a frantic energy that mirrored her own. She had no idea what was happening or why the pirates were so determined to wipe them out. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let this colony fall without a fight. The world outside was chaos. Pirates ransacked buildings, throwing firebombs into homes, setting fires that lit up the night sky like a hellish inferno. The sounds of gunfire and explosions filled the air, making it impossible to hear anything beyond the roar of destruction. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she sprinted toward the nearest weapons station, desperate to turn the tide. But when she arrived, it was clear the pirates had already disabled the system. Their technology was too advanced, and the colony's defenses were too weak. A sudden piercing shriek tore through the air, followed by the guttural roar of a pirate ship's weapon. Sarah ducked instinctively, the blast narrowly missing her, but the heat from the explosion singed her face. She felt the burn, but didn't stop running. Her people were depending on her. Then, in a moment that seemed to freeze time, Sarah felt a sharp tug on her sleeve. Whiskers. The cat leaped from her arms, his claws sinking into her jacket. She glanced down, confused, and saw the glint of a pirate's blaster aimed directly at her. The blast came, but in an instant, the cat darted forward, his small body colliding with the blaster, knocking it off course. The blast flew wide, missing Sarah by mere inches and hitting a nearby crate instead. Whiskers had saved her life. The weight of what had just happened crashed down on Sarah. She stumbled back, her heart still pounding, but her mind processing the moment. Whiskers, in his panic, had acted instinctively, and in doing so had spared her from certain death. She looked down at the cat, her emotions raw and suddenly too much to hold. I owe you, little one," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The bond between them, something so simple yet so profound, was more than just a pet. It was a lifeline, a reminder of what she was fighting for, but there was no time to dwell on it. The pirates were relentless, and she had to keep fighting. She turned her focus back to the task at hand, moving toward the last remaining weapons systems. She wasn't about to let her people be wiped out without a fight. The pirates had underestimated humanity before. They would learn too late that humans were not easily beaten. As Sarah prepared for the next wave of the attack, she received another unexpected message. A pirate, captured by one of her soldiers, had managed to escape his restraints. He spoke of something far darker than the pirates themselves, a threat that lay beyond them, one that had been manipulating them from the shadows. The real enemy, The true force that had orchestrated the destruction of humanity's presence in the galaxy was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The pirates, ruthless and powerful as they were only pawns in a much larger game. And Sarah Locke had just stumbled upon the first piece of the puzzle. Sarah sat in the dimly lit command center, the hum of the machinery and the clatter of voices fading into a dull background noise as she processed the information. The pirates had retreated, or perhaps been driven off, but their departure had left the colony in ruins. The air was thick with the smell of burning debris, and the remnants of families who had sought shelter in the bunkers were emerging cautiously, eyes wide with confusion and fear. They had survived the first wave, but Sarah knew this was far from over. The pirates were only the beginning. As Sarah sat, trying to steady her breath, a soldier entered the command center. In his grip, he held the pirate, one of the attackers who had been captured in the chaos. The man, bound and bruised, was dragged into the room, his face marked with the sweat of exhaustion and fear. He was a small man, his eyes wide with panic, and he looked more like a cornered animal than a hardened soldier. But there was something about the way he carried himself, something desperate in his movements, that made Sarah's stomach churn. "Captain," the soldier said, his voice low, "he has information. It's not what we thought." Sarah's mind raced. She knew the pirates had come to raid, to pillage, but the intensity of their attack had always felt like more than just a typical raid. She could feel that something was off, but she had no solid answers until now. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the pirate. "What do you know?" she asked, her voice steady, but laced with an edge of impatience. The pirate looked up at her, his eyes wild with fear. For a moment he said nothing, but then something in his gaze shifted and he finally spoke, his voice trembling. "You don't understand," he muttered, his words barely a whisper. "We weren't here for you. Not really." Sarah leaned in, the words striking her like a blow. "Then what was this about? Why attack us at all?" The pirate swallowed hard, looking like he might break down at any moment. "We were the distraction. The real threat is coming. It's already on its way." Sarah felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. "What threat?" The pirate hesitated, as if the very act of speaking the words would bring doom upon them all. But then, in a voice filled with dread, he uttered the name. "The Visarians." Sarah blinked, trying to make sense of the words. "The Visarians? Who are they?" The pirate shuddered. "The apex predators. They're not like anything you've ever seen. They don't just destroy, they consume everything. Their hunger is endless, and it doesn't matter what you are. Species, technology, cities, it all becomes fuel for them. We were just bait, a means to lure you out. They were always coming for you." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah's mind reeled, her breath catching in her throat. She had heard rumors of such creatures, whispered stories of ancient, unstoppable forces that consumed entire civilizations. But hearing it from the pirate, seeing the terror in his eyes, it made it real. This wasn't just about pirates. This was something far worse. "They're close," the pirate continued, his voice breaking. "The attack wasn't meant to kill you all, not yet. It was just a warning. They're going to take everything you've built, your colony, your people. You won't survive, not without something more than what you've got." Sarah turned away from him, her hand clenching into a fist as the weight of his words settled over her. The Visarians. This wasn't just an attack. It was the beginning of something far darker, a force beyond anything she could have prepared for. She fought to control the panic rising in her chest, the fear that threatened to overtake her reason. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. Not when so many depended on her. She met Hawkins' gaze across the room. He was standing at a console, eyes scanning the information, his expression grim. He didn't have to say it. She knew what was coming. The Visarians weren't just a threat. They were the threat. And with the pirates having already crippled their defenses, they were going to be woefully unprepared. "We need to prepare," Sarah said, her voice hoarse but determined. "We can't let them come in without a fight. Start fortifying the outer barriers again. Bring the civilians into the reinforced sections. We'll need to double our patrols and set up traps, anything we can do to slow them down." Hawkins nodded, though his expression remained uncertain. "We're not ready for this, Sarah. Our weapons can't touch them. The pirates, they barely managed to scrape by, and they're better equipped than us. We're sitting ducks if they come here in full force." "I know," Sarah replied, her gaze lingering on the ruins outside. "But we fight anyway. We have to. They won't leave us a chance if we don't." As Hawkins moved to issue orders, Sarah stood still, her mind racing. The Visarians weren't just another enemy. They were the enemy, a force of nature that wiped out civilizations. Her people were still reeling from the attack, their defenses shattered, and now they had to face something far worse. But Sarah wasn't going to back down. She couldn't. There was no turning back now. She reached down, her fingers brushing against Whiskers, who'd been sitting quietly in her lap. The cat's soft purr was a steadying presence, a brief moment of comfort amidst the storm. As much as she wanted to hold on to the warmth of the cat's small body, she knew there was no time for peace. The clock was ticking. Her thoughts were interrupted by a flash on one of the monitors. A warning sign blinked in bright red across the screen, an incoming signal, a massive energy spike in the atmosphere. Hawkins looked up from the console, his face going pale. "They're here." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she turned toward the screen, her breath catching in her chest. The Visarians were closing in. Outside, the sky had darkened. The massive ships of the Visarians had entered the atmosphere, their enormous silhouettes blotting out the stars. The first signs of their ships, vast monolithic structures, loomed on the horizon, casting long shadows over the colony. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, taking in the sight. The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath her feet felt suddenly very small. This wasn't just an attack. It was the beginning of the end, but Sarah wasn't ready to give up. "Not yet. We'll make our stand here," she said, her voice ringing with determination. "We fight, we survive, we protect our home." Her words were a rallying cry, but inside, she was terrified. She had no illusions about the scale of the threat, but as she looked around at the people who depended on her, she realized something deeper. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for everything they had built. And no matter how impossible it seemed, she would stand beside them. The Visarians were here, and the battle for the future of the colony had just begun. The Visarians had arrived. Their massive ships now hovered above the colony, blocking out the stars like dark clouds on a stormy night. Sarah stood at the command center, her fists clenched in determination. The air inside the room was thick with tension, as officers and soldiers rushed about, scrambling to prepare for what was coming. Hawkins, standing beside her, looked pale but resolute. "We're outgunned," Hawkins said, his voice steady but betraying the uncertainty behind his words. "We can't even touch them with the weapons we have. They're not just a threat, they're a catastrophe." Sarah's eyes flickered over to the monitors showing the incoming Visarian fleet, the sheer size of their ships filling the screens like titanic shadows. The colony's outer defenses were barely holding, and the civilian shelters, crowded with frightened families, would not withstand the Visarians for long. They were already retreating to the final line of defense, the heart of the colony, hoping against hope that their weapons would hold the line. Sarah turned away from the monitors, her mind racing. She knew they couldn't last long against the Visarians without something drastic. The weapon, the one hidden in the depths of the colony's research facility, was their only hope. But even she wasn't fully sure what it was. Only that it was humanity's last-ditch effort, a bioengineered creation that might be the key to stopping the Visarians. If it worked. But there was a catch. no one truly understood the full consequences of using it. "We don't have a choice," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Prepare the weapon." In the depths of the colony, far below the surface, Sarah and her team made their way to the hidden research facility. The halls were eerily silent, the only sound the echo of their footsteps as they moved deeper into the facility. Sarah's thoughts kept returning to Whiskers. The cat had been her anchor in the chaos, a small, comforting presence amidst the storm. She missed the warmth of the little creature against her, but now was not the time to dwell on such things. They had no time to waste. They reached the secured lab, where the weapon, a large pulsating bioform encased in a containment chamber, stood. The creature inside was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. It was a monstrous, chitinous organism with glowing tendrils running through its body. It was both beautiful and terrifying, its very presence radiating an aura of raw, primal energy. It had been designed to be a weapon, a creation of their own making, something to fight back against the universe's greatest threats. Now it was their only hope. "Do we really know what this thing can do?" Hawkins asked, his voice filled with doubt. Sarah didn't answer immediately. The weapon had been designed for a war they had never thought would come to their doorstep. The truth was, no one knew how effective it would be. All they knew was that it was capable of incredible destruction. But what would it cost? What would it take from them in return? She didn't know, but the answer didn't matter now. She had made a promise to her people. They would survive. She would make sure of it. "We don't have the luxury of not trying," Sarah said, her voice low but resolute. She turned to the facility's technician, who had been anxiously awaiting the order to activate the weapon. "Activate it." The technician hesitated, his fingers hovering over the control panel. "Are you sure, Captain? This is dangerous. We could lose everything." Sarah's gaze hardened. "We'll lose everything if we don't." With a grim nod, the technician activated the sequence. The weapon's containment chamber hissed as it opened, and the creature inside began to stir, its body twitching and writhing as if waking from a long slumber. The air in the room became thick with a strange, almost electric charge, and Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. This was it, the last hope for humanity's survival. Outside, the battle raged on. The Visarian ships had begun their descent, their massive forms casting long shadows over the colony. The first wave of their soldiers had landed, monstrous, hulking creatures that towered over the colonists. They were barely humanoid, their skin a sickly greenish hue, their eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. Their weapons were devastating, and the sound of their blasts filled the air with an ominous rhythmic thrum. The colonists fought back with everything they had, guns, improvised explosives, makeshift weapons, but they were outmatched. The Visarians tore through the lines, their monstrous forms relentless and unstoppable. The survivors fought with everything they had, but it was clear that the battle was lost. Sarah could see the fear in the eyes of the people as they scrambled to defend themselves. The colony's once proud walls were crumbling before the onslaught. But then something unexpected happened. The creature, the weapon that they had unleashed, began to take its first steps into the fray. Its massive form emerged from the depths of the research facility, its glowing tendrils reaching out like twisted vines. Its body was alive with energy, radiating raw, destructive power. As it advanced, the air around it crackled, and the ground beneath its feet trembled with each step. It was like nothing the Visarians had ever faced. The first Visarian soldiers that encountered the creature were obliterated in seconds. Their weapons had no effect on it. The creature tore through them with vicious speed, its tendrils slicing through their armored bodies like paper. Sarah watched from the command center as the battle unfolded on the screens before her. For the first time since the Visarians had arrived, there was hope. But that hope was short-lived. As the creature continued its rampage, the colonists watched in awe and terror, realizing too late that they were not the only ones who had unleashed something dangerous. The creature, while incredibly powerful, was wild and uncontrollable. It wasn't a perfect weapon. It was a living being, and it was acting on instinct, wreaking havoc without discrimination. Its rampage began to spread, hitting both Vezarians and colonists alike. "Shut it down." Hawkins's voice echoed in the command center, frantic and desperate. "We can't control it, it's killing everyone." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. The weapon had worked too well. The creature was out of control, and the cost of their desperate measure was becoming clear. Her people were caught in the crossfire, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She watched, helpless, as the chaos unfolded. Colonists were falling, their lives snuffed out by a force they had unleashed in a final attempt to survive. And the Vezarians, despite their monstrous presence, were not the greatest threat. It was the creature, their creation, that now posed the most danger. The weapon had brought them a glimmer of victory, but at a steep, unforeseen price. Just as it seemed all was lost, a new, more terrifying truth came to light. The creature, as destructive as it was merely a small part of something even darker. The Vezarians were not the only predators in the galaxy. There were others, greater, more powerful forces that had been watching, waiting. Sarah knew then that the real battle had not yet even begun. The battle for survival had only just started, and the colonists' fate remained uncertain. The colony was on the edge of total collapse. The walls, once proud and sturdy, now stood, battered and crumbling. The Vezarians had pushed through every defense, their monstrous forms like waves crashing against the shore. It wasn't just the pirates anymore. It was the relentless, unstoppable force of nature that was the Vezarians. Their ships had rained destruction down upon the land, their soldiers slaughtering anything that moved with unthinkable speed. Sarah Locke stood at the heart of the chaos, staring out at the colony's central square, now filled with smoke and the remnants of what had once been homes. The fires had consumed everything, every hope, every dream. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning wood and metal. The once pristine environment, now a twisted, scorched ruin. She had fought to protect these people. Every step, every decision she had made had been for their survival. But now it felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down into the abyss. Her thoughts drifted back to Whiskers, the small cat that had been by her side through all of this, through the chaos and destruction. The cat had become her anchor, a symbol of everything she was fighting for. But now, even that bond couldn't shield her from the crushing weight of the situation. The Vezarians had revealed themselves for what they truly were. They weren't just invaders, they were hunters. And the worst part of it all, Sarah realized, was that humans weren't simply an inconvenience to them. They were a threat, a challenge. The Vezarians had evolved into the apex species of the galaxy not because of brute strength alone, but because of their intellectual stagnation. They were predators that consumed everything in their path, but they had grown too comfortable at the top of the food chain. Humans were different. Humans could adapt. Humans had the potential to surpass even the Vezarians. They had an insatiable hunger for knowledge, for progress. And that, to the Vezarians, was unacceptable. To them, the survival of humanity was a challenge they could not allow. Their existence was a threat to everything the Vezarians had built. In the command center, Sarah had gathered the last of her remaining forces. Their eyes were tired, haunted. Soldiers, engineers, and civilians alike, they had all seen what the Vezarians could do. Their faces were grim as they gathered around Sarah, awaiting her orders. There was no time for hesitation now. Every second was a second the Vezarians used to solidify their control over the colony. "We're running out of time," Hawkins said, his voice tight with urgency. The Visarians are nearly at the inner defenses. We can't keep holding them off like this. Sarah's eyes flicked over the worn faces of her comrades. She had led them through so much already, and now they stood at the precipice. Unsure whether there was anything left to fight for. "We're not going down without a fight," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "I know we don't have the firepower to defeat them in a head-on battle, but there's one thing they don't know about us." Hawkins raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "We're not like them," Sarah replied, her tone hardening with the weight of her resolve. "We're human." She looked at the small group of people around her, the last survivors of the colony. She knew that their survival depended on them using their minds, not their brawn, and that was where the Visarians had made their fatal mistake. They thought they could simply wipe humanity from the galaxy, but they didn't understand the human capacity for resourcefulness, for innovation, for surviving against all odds. "We may not be able to defeat them physically," Sarah continued, her gaze narrowing as the intensity of her plan formed in her mind, "but we can outsmart them. We can use their arrogance against them." The room was silent as the weight of her words settled in. The Visarians had come to this planet expecting an easy victory, never imagining that they would face an adversary that could fight back using the very thing they feared most: intelligence. Humans had survived against predators, against adversity, and now they would survive against the Visarians, not with strength, but with their sheer will to endure. But Sarah knew what this meant. To outsmart the Visarians, she would have to make a sacrifice, a choice no leader ever wants to make. To give the remaining colonists a fighting chance, she would have to give everything. She turned to Hawkins, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have one last chance, but it's going to cost us. I'm going to need you to carry out the final part of the plan, even if it means we don't make it out alive." Hawkins swallowed hard. "What are you asking me to do?" Sarah's gaze hardened, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and sorrow. "I'm asking you to set the final charge. If we can trigger it from here, we can take out the Visarian command ship. If we're going to survive, we need to make sure they don't get away." "But," Hawkins started, but Sarah held up, her hand silencing him. "This is it," she said, her voice resolute. "We either stop them now, or we lose everything. I won't let them destroy what we've built." Hawkins nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He didn't have to say anything more. There was nothing more to say. The decision had been made. As the final moments approached, Sarah stood at the command center, her heart pounding in her chest. The last of her forces were preparing for the final stand. The Visarians were just moments away from breaking through the final defense. The countdown was ticking down, the seconds slipping away like sand through her fingers. Sarah knew what she had to do. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing up, about fighting for the future of her people. The odds were stacked against them. They might not survive. But one thing was certain. They wouldn't go down without showing the Visarians just what humanity was capable of. With a final, steadying breath, Sarah turned to face the monitors. She looked at the faces of the people she had fought for, and then, without another word, she initiated the sequence. The detonators, hidden within the colony's core, would trigger a massive explosion, enough to take down the Visarian command ship, enough to ensure the rest of the Visarian fleet would think twice about ever targeting humanity again. As the countdown began, Sarah's mind flashed to the faces of those she loved. Hawkins, the soldiers, the families who had fought so hard to survive. Whiskers, too, and the small moments of peace that had once seemed so simple. And with that, Sarah Locke, leader, protector, and survivor, made the ultimate choice. The final blast lit up the sky, a brilliant, blinding flash that illuminated the darkness. The colony's fate had been sealed.